There is a specific kind of actor that Hollywood has never quite known what to do with. Not because they're bad, not because they don't fit in, but because they're so reliably, dependably, quietly excellent in everything they do that the industry just keeps using them without ever actually seeing them. They show up in the biggest franchises on the planet, they deliver, they go home, and somehow, after all of it, the world still doesn't know their name the way it should. Karl Urban spent the better part of 30 years being that actor. He was in Lord of the Rings. He was in Star Trek. He was the lead in one of the most underrated action films of the last 2 decades. He showed up in the MCU for Thor, Ragnarok, and was so good that people still bring it up. He fought Vin Diesel, Matt Damon, and various monsters, aliens, and corrupt superheroes. He did all of it with no ego, no fuss, and no complaints. And then, at 53 years old, playing a foul-mouthed, violent, barely held-together wreck of a man named Billy Butcher, the world finally caught up to what the rest of us already knew. Karl Urban is one of the best actors working today, and with The Boys Season 5 airing right now, this felt like the right moment to ask the obvious question: how did we get here? How does someone spend nearly 3 decades being this good in this many things and still somehow feel like a discovery? This is the story of an actor the industry kept using and never quite appreciating, until it had no choice. This is Karl Urban. Before we talk about Karl Urban the movie star, we have to talk about Karl Urban the New Zealander, because this matters more than it usually does with actors from that part of the world. Karl was born in Wellington on June 7th, 1972. He grew up in a country where the film industry was basically non-existent. New Zealand in the early 90s was not a place you moved to if you wanted to become a famous actor. It was a place you moved away from. But Karl didn't go anywhere. He started working locally, doing theater, doing television, building something from nothing in a market that was mostly nothing. His first acting role came at age 8. A single line in the TV series Pioneer Women. He later appeared in local shows like Shark in the Park and joined Shortland Street for the 1993 to 1994 season, playing Jamie Forrest. His first real foothold came with roles in Hercules, The Legendary Journeys as Cupid and Julius Caesar, and its spin-off, Xena, Warrior Princess. Across multiple roles from 1996 to 2001, yes, several characters in the same universe. And before you get too sarcastic about that, understand that these shows were genuinely massive in the 90s. Teenagers around the world were obsessed with them. They played in dozens of countries. They were campy and fun and ridiculous, and people loved them completely without irony. And also, this is where something important happened, because those shows were produced by Sam Raimi and Rob Tapert and filmed in New Zealand. They required a huge local crew and cast. They essentially built a professional film infrastructure in a country that barely had one before. Karl Urban later said those projects were vital for the New Zealand industry and for what happened next. What happened next was Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson had been quietly developing the most ambitious film project in the history of cinema. 3 films, back-to-back, adapting the most beloved fantasy novels ever written, with a cast of hundreds and a budget that made studio executives physically uncomfortable. He needed a crew that could handle it. Thanks partly to what Hercules and Xena had built, he had one, and he needed actors. Now here is the funny part. Jackson didn't cast Karl Urban because of Hercules or Xena. He cast him because of a small New Zealand comedy called The Price of Milk in 2000. After watching a rough cut of Urban's performance, Jackson cast him in the last 2 films of the trilogy. Urban landed the role of Éomer, nephew of King Theoden, 3rd Marshal of the Rittermark, and one of the most quietly badass characters in the entire trilogy. And then, having been cast in the single most culturally important fantasy film series ever made, Karl Urban faced a problem that would follow him for much of his career. There were too many famous people in Lord of the Rings for anyone to be noticed unless they were in the Fellowship itself. The Fellowship had Viggo Mortensen, Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Orlando Bloom, Sean Bean. Everyone else was fighting for scraps of audience attention in whatever time was left over. Éomer doesn't show up properly until The Two Towers in 2002. He arrives on horseback early in the film in the middle of a field and immediately starts making threats, which is admittedly a great entrance, but it's not the kind of entrance that gets you on the cover of magazines. What Éomer does, and what Karl Urban does with him, is be completely unshowily competent. He rides, he fights, he leads. He takes down 2 Oliphants with 1 spear while Legolas is busy being photographed doing a surfboard stunt on a single elephant and getting all the glory for it. There is still a passionate faction of Lord of the Rings fans who believe Éomer is more impressive than Legolas and is simply not given the cultural credit he deserves. If you are in that faction, and I respect you, Karl Urban is your patron saint. But the audience at large didn't come away from Lord of the Rings talking about Karl Urban. They came away talking about Viggo Mortensen and Elijah Wood and the one elf with the cheekbones. Karl went back to New Zealand, collected his paycheck, and prepared for the next thing. The next thing was his Hollywood debut in Ghost Ship in 2002, followed by a stretch of films in the mid-2000s that tells you everything about where Karl Urban's career was at that point. He took 2 villain roles in 2 massive productions. He was in The Bourne Supremacy in 2004 as the assassin Kirill, and he was in The Chronicles of Riddick in 2004 as the villainous commander Vako. Both are films where his job is essentially to look dangerous, do dangerous things, and then lose to the protagonist in a dramatically satisfying way. He is excellent at this. Genuinely, playing a credible antagonist for Matt Damon and Vin Diesel in back-to-back years is not nothing. These are not small roles in small films. He got to drift cars through Moscow and Berlin for Bourne, which he later described as genuinely fun even if his actual screen time was relatively brief. And he had genuine chemistry with Vin Diesel on the Riddick set, which led to the cast-passing time between takes with enthusiastic Dungeons & Dragons sessions. Vin Diesel is a famously devoted fan, and those games included Judi Dench and Thandie Newton as well. Karl Urban, Vin Diesel, Judi Dench, and Thandie Newton rolling dice in a sci-fi epic. I have no further commentary. It simply happened, but the Chronicles of Riddick underperformed. It had genuine ambitions to be the start of a massive sci-fi franchise, and audiences simply weren't interested enough. Plans for sequels slowed, though Vako returned in Riddick in 2013 in a cameo. Karl was back to square one. What came next was Doom in 2005. And if you want to understand the specific quality of bad luck that followed Karl Urban around for most of his career, Doom is where you start. The Doom movie had been stuck in development hell since the late 90s. At various points, Vin Diesel was offered the lead role of John Grimm, but turned it down. Then Dwayne Johnson was offered the same role, but was more drawn to Sarge, the film's ruthless antagonist, saying the character's darker side interested him more. With Johnson moving to that role, Karl Urban stepped in as John Reaper Grimm, the film's complicated hero. This was, as it turned out, both a lucky break and absolutely not a lucky break. Lucky because Karl Urban got to lead a major studio film. Not lucky because the film was a disappointment, the test screenings were rough, the monsters looked dated, the script was mediocre on its best day, and the expectations from the gaming community were so towering that even a decent film probably would have disappointed them. It grossed around $58 million worldwide on a budget of $60 to $70 million. What the film did have, buried inside all of that, was a 5-minute first-person shooter sequence that is legitimately one of the most technically interesting things a studio film attempted in that decade. The filmmakers understood that the entire identity of Doom was its perspective, that you were always looking through the character's eyes, and they put that on screen in a way that actually worked: moving camera, character hands in frame, proper spatial awareness. It took 14 days to shoot that one sequence. Film students noticed. Several people who went on to make influential games and action sequences have cited that scene specifically. It did not save the movie. Dwayne Johnson got a Razzie nomination while Karl Urban quietly moved on and didn't complain once. He actually talked about Doom positively in interviews, which, given the film's reception, is either genuine professionalism or the most impressive act of optimism in recorded cinematic history. Then came Pathfinder in 2007. Pathfinder is a 2007 adventure film about a Viking child raised by Native Americans who grows up to protect his adopted people from his biological people. Karl Urban was the lead. It had a $45 million budget and an R rating and ambitions. It also had a development process that made Doom look peaceful. Test audiences hated the first cut. The release was delayed by a year, multiple re-edits, constant problems, and when it finally came out, it grossed about $31 million worldwide and disappeared immediately. Karl Urban later discussed lean years around this time, with limited offers and auditions not panning out. He was a man in his mid-30s who had been in Lord of the Rings and 2 major franchise films, and was still somehow not quite a star. And then J.J. Abrams started looking for someone to play Dr. Leonard McCoy. Karl Urban is a lifelong Star Trek fan, not casually, properly. He grew up watching the original series, and he understood exactly what DeForest Kelley had built with that character. McCoy is the emotional center of the original Enterprise crew. Kirk is the instinct and the charisma. Spock is the logic. McCoy is the conscience, the grumpiness, the deeply buried warmth, and the medical genius wrapped in a permanent attitude problem. Getting him wrong would have been easy. Getting him right required someone who genuinely understood what the character was. The 2009 Star Trek reboot was one of the best-received blockbusters of that year, and one of the best-reviewed Star Trek films ever made. It was Abrams at peak Abrams, before things got complicated and the cast was genuinely extraordinary. But even in that company, Karl Urban stood out. His McCoy wasn't an impression of Kelley, it was a tribute. He had the rhythm, the timing, the specific flavor of Southern irritability that defines the character, and he added something new underneath it, a vulnerability that made the grumpiness feel earned rather than performed. He later described his approach as cherry-picking the essence of what DeForest Kelley did and infusing it into the character without slipping into imitation. And the highest praise he could have received came from Leonard Nimoy himself. After the film was released, Nimoy told Urban that watching his performance had moved him to tears. It reminded him so powerfully of his old friend and co-star DeForest Kelley. That is not a footnote. That is what it looks like when an actor does something completely right. Critics noticed. Audiences noticed. Suddenly, Karl Urban was in interviews everywhere, and everyone was describing his McCoy as a highlight of a film full of highlights. The mailbox filled up again. He chose wisely. Read in 2010, the action comedy based on the DC Comics series had a cast that included Bruce Willis, Morgan Freeman, John Malkovich, and Helen Mirren. Karl Urban played the CIA operative trying to take them all down. He is very funny in it. Not funny in a trying to be funny way, but funny in a straight-faced while surrounded by chaos way, which is the harder kind to pull off. The film was a hit. Then came Priest in 2011, loosely based on a Korean manhwa, where Urban played Black Hat, the film's villain, a former priest turned vampire, the main antagonist to Paul Bettany's lead. It underperformed, and Urban's considerable talents were largely wasted in it, but he was already moving on to the project that should have made him a star and somehow didn't quite. Judge Dredd is one of the most influential British comics ever made. Created in 1977, it helped invent the modern conception of dystopian cyberpunk long before that word existed. The character himself is an archetype, a fascist lawman in a future megacity who is simultaneously the hero and a pointed critique of authoritarianism. He is the law. He says this constantly. He never ever removes his helmet. The helmet is the whole point. Dredd without the helmet is just a man. Dredd with the helmet is an institution, a symbol, a faceless force of state power, which makes it baffling that the 1995 Sylvester Stallone adaptation removed the helmet in the first act and kept it off for most of the film. Director Danny Cannon has been talking about how much he hated that decision in interviews for 30 years. Comic creator John Wagner was furious. And the film's legacy, despite some genuine fans, is mostly as an example of how not to adapt source material you don't respect. Pete Travis took a different approach with Dredd in 2012. He went back to basics, practical effects, a claustrophobic setting, real stakes, and he cast Karl Urban, who understood immediately and completely that the helmet was non-negotiable. Karl Urban never removes his helmet in Dredd, not once. His entire performance is from the chin down and from the voice box outward. And he is extraordinary. He finds Dredd's humanity not through exposition or backstory, but through the quality of his silences and the specific way he carries himself through violence. He makes you believe in this character completely, while showing you almost nothing of the person inside the costume, which is exactly what the character requires and is genuinely difficult to do. The film looks incredible. The megacity is convincing and grimy and real. The slow-motion drug sequences are visually stunning in a way that influenced a generation of action filmmakers and cinematographers, and composer Paul Leonard Morgan essentially reinvented the sound of cinematic cyberpunk for it, abandoning the classic synthwave of Vangelis and replacing it with something harder and more aggressive that perfectly matched the film's uncompromising tone. Dredd opened in September 2012 and grossed $41 million worldwide on a budget of around $35 million. Karl Urban believes to this day, and he is almost certainly right, that the film failed because nobody knew it existed. The marketing was essentially non-existent. There was no campaign. People who saw it loved it. Critics who reviewed it praised it. John Wagner, the creator of the character, called it a faithful and excellent adaptation. And in the first week of its DVD release in North America alone, it sold 750,000 copies in a week. That's not a film that failed because it was bad. That's a film that failed because a studio didn't believe in it enough to tell anyone it existed. The push for a Dredd sequel has been ongoing ever since. Karl Urban has confirmed he would return. The fandom that built around the film is devoted and loud, and has kept the conversation going for over a decade. Whether it actually happens remains to be seen, but if it does, it will be one of the more satisfying second acts in modern geek cinema. Following Dredd, there was Almost Human in 2013 and 2014, a near-future police procedural for Fox in which Karl Urban played a cop partnered with an android. It ran for 1 season. It was canceled. Fox, being Fox, aired the episodes out of order in a different sequence from the one the creators intended, which managed to confuse the audience just enough to kill the show's momentum before it could build any. This was apparently not Karl Urban's first experience with a project being undone by factors entirely outside his control. There were 2 more Star Trek films. Into Darkness in 2013, which divided the fanbase so dramatically that people are still arguing about it, and Beyond in 2016, which most people agreed was better. The franchise then went quiet for a while, which meant Karl Urban went quiet for a while in the mainstream sense, taking roles like Gavin in Pete's Dragon in 2016, a hunter and lumberjack who serves as the film's antagonist, and Scourge in Thor: Ragnarok in 2017. And Scourge deserves a mention, because in a film directed by Taika Waititi, bursting with color and comedy, and Chris Hemsworth being funny for the first time, Karl Urban walked in playing a character who starts as comic relief and ends in a moment of quiet, devastating heroism. It is a small role. It lands harder than it has any right to. That is Karl Urban in one sentence. And then, after years of development and false starts and passed around rights and abandoned adaptations, Amazon Prime finally started producing a TV series based on Garth Ennis's comic book, The Boys. The Boys is not a subtle comic. It was created in 2006 as a sustained, often genuinely disturbing satire of superhero culture, corporate power, American exceptionalism, and the specific damage that unchecked celebrity does to people who were never equipped to handle it. The superheroes in this universe are not good people who do hard things. They are mostly monsters who have been carefully packaged by a media corporation to look like good people while doing whatever they want. Billy Butcher is the man trying to burn that whole system down. He is not a hero. He is charming in the way that genuinely dangerous people can be charming. He is funny in the way that people who have suffered real loss are sometimes funny because it's either laugh or fall apart. He uses people. He lies constantly. He has a code that he claims is about justice, but is at least partially about personal revenge. And underneath all of it, there is something that resembles a conscience. A wound that hasn't healed, a love that got taken from him and left him violent and purposeful and ruined. Karl Urban plays this character in a stylized London working-class accent. He is a New Zealander. That accent is one of the most distinctive and easily ridiculed dialects in the English language, and doing it badly is extremely easy. Doing it convincingly as a non-British actor, while also being funny, while also being physically menacing, while also somehow making a deeply unpleasant man into someone you can't look away from, is the kind of acting feat that gets discussed quietly by people who know how hard it actually is. The Boys premiered in 2019, 8 million viewers in the first days of release. It became the most successful original program in Amazon Prime Video history. It appeared on lists of the best television of the decade. It divided audiences over its political content in exactly the way good satire is supposed to divide audiences, because it was actually saying something rather than just being provocative for its own sake. And at the center of all of it, in every season, with an argument-ending performance, was Karl Urban. What he does with Butcher across the seasons of this show is genuinely remarkable. Season 1, Butcher is a weapon pointed at a target. Season 2 starts to reveal the cracks. Season 3 goes somewhere so dark with the character that it reframes everything that came before. Season 4 showed a version of Butcher confronting his own mortality and the question of whether he was ever actually fighting for anything real. And now in Season 5, the final season airing in 2026, the show is bringing everything to a conclusion, and Karl Urban is carrying the weight of that the way only someone who has lived with this character for years can. The chemistry between Urban and Anthony Starr, who plays the series villain Homelander, is one of the great actor pairings in modern television. Here's a detail that the universe clearly arranged on purpose. Both of them are New Zealanders, both born in Wellington. Both of them appeared in Xena. Warrior princess early in their careers, decades before they were facing off as Butcher and Homelander. Starr even recalled being put in tights and standing in front of a green screen pretending to be a horse. Two kids from Wellington doing the same cheesy syndicated fantasy show in the 90s, ending up as the two leads of one of the most critically acclaimed superhero series ever made. You genuinely could not write it. There are also upcoming projects, including Mortal Kombat 2, where Karl Urban will play Johnny Cage, a character based loosely on Jean-Claude Van Damme, a man famous for doing the splits. I am genuinely curious about how Karl Urban approaches the splits. I assume with commitment and without complaint, which is basically how he approaches everything. But beyond the upcoming projects, there is something worth naming about what Karl Urban's career actually represents, because it's more interesting than just a guy who finally got famous. He is not famous the way actors usually become famous. He didn't get the one transcendent role at 25 and spent the rest of his career managing expectations. He didn't have a spectacular fall and a comeback arc that the press could narrate. He just worked consistently and well in good things and bad things and mediocre things for nearly 30 years until a role came along that was specific enough, complex enough, and large enough in its platform to show everyone at once what had been there the whole time. His performance as McCoy moved Leonard Nimoy to tears, genuinely. Nimoy saw Karl Urban's work and was reminded so powerfully of his old friend DeForest Kelley that he wept. That is not a career footnote. That is what it looks like when an actor does something completely right with a character that another actor spent decades building. He wore a helmet for an entire film and made you feel every emotion of the man underneath it anyway. He played a villain for Matt Damon and a villain for Vin Diesel and was credible in both roles, even though those two men occupy almost opposite ends of the action hero spectrum. He is, by all accounts from everyone who has worked with him, one of the most professional and pleasant people on any set he's ever been on. No documented tantrums, no stories about being difficult, no on-set controversy. Just a man who shows up, knows his lines, does the work, and goes home. Which sounds simple and is actually extraordinary. There is a version of Karl Urban's career that reads as frustrating. The near misses, the projects that should have been bigger, the films that deserved better marketing, the roles that got cut, the shows that got canceled, the franchises that stalled. You could tell this story as a tragedy of timing and circumstance, but there's another way to read it, and I think it's the more accurate one. Karl Urban spent nearly 30 years becoming exactly the actor that Billy Butcher needed. Every villain he played taught him how to find the humanity inside malevolence. Every franchise film taught him how to hold the screen when everyone around you is a star. Every failure taught him how to keep working without self-pity. The Dread experience in particular, watching something you're proud of go unseen and responding by saying you'd do it again and you believe in it, requires a kind of professional dignity that not many people have. He needed the path to be that long to become what Butcher requires. And Season 5, the final season, the one airing right now, is the culmination of not just the show, but of a career that has been building toward exactly this kind of moment without anyone, including maybe Karl Urban, fully knowing it. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a man who was in Lord of the Rings and you forgot because there were elves everywhere, who was in Star Trek and became the most beloved part of a beloved cast, who was in one of the most influential action films of the last 20 years and almost nobody saw it in theaters, who was part of every major geek property of his generation without ever quite being called a geek culture icon, even though he essentially is one, and who is right now in 2026 in the final season of one of the most culturally significant shows of the streaming era, proving that patience and consistency and just being genuinely, reliably, quietly excellent for long enough eventually adds up to something that nobody can ignore. Karl Urban didn't need Hollywood to discover him. He was there the whole time. Hollywood just needed a minute. It took about 30 years, but it got there eventually. So there you have it, Karl Urban's career and all of his best work. What's your favorite role of his? Drop it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe and check out our other videos. Until next time.